I often sit by the window in the evenings, watching the sun sink low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. There's something about sunsets that makes me reflect on the paths I've walked, the choices I've made, and the people who've shaped my journey. My name is Margaret Carter, though most people just call me Maggie. I've lived many seasons of life, some filled with joy, others with heartbreak, but there was a time when my world felt simple and safe. Back then, it was just me and my husband, Thomas. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke louder than anything he could say. When I first met him, he was a young carpenter with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart. There was a steadiness about him that drew me in, like a calm river on a summer day. We met at a small town fair one warm evening. I remember the smell of popcorn and the sound of laughter filling the air as he nervously asked if he could walk me home. He was shy, fumbling over his words, and I couldn't help but smile. When I said yes, his face lit up like a boy's. That night, beneath the glow of the street lamps, something between us began to grow, something strong and lasting. We married a year later. Our early years together weren't easy. We had a tiny house with creaky floors and a leaky roof, but it was ours. We filled it with laughter, late-night conversations, and whispered dreams about the future. When our first child was born, I thought my heart might burst with happiness. Then came another, and another, 3 beautiful children, each carrying a piece of us. Thomas's steady gaze, my stubborn chin. Thomas worked tirelessly to provide for us. He'd leave before the sun rose and return long after dark, his hands rough and calloused. Sometimes, when I'd express worry over how hard he pushed himself, he'd smile and say, "Don't you fret, Maggie. Everything I do is for you and the kids." And I believed him, completely and without question. You see, trust was the foundation of our marriage. We didn't have fancy things, but we had faith in each other. And back then, I thought that was enough. Life has a way of testing love, though. There were bills we struggled to pay, sicknesses that scared us half to death, and moments when exhaustion threatened to consume us. But through it all, we leaned on each other. I still remember the night our youngest, Lily, burned with a fever that wouldn't break. I was frantic, pacing the room, whispering desperate prayers. Thomas held her close, rocking her gently, humming until her tiny body finally relaxed and her breathing steadied. In that moment, watching him cradle our baby girl, I thought, this man would never let us down. Never. That belief became my anchor. On the hardest days, it was my certainty, my truth. As the years passed, our children grew up and left home to build lives of their own. The once noisy, chaotic house grew quiet. Thomas and I entered a new chapter, just the two of us again, like it had been in the very beginning. We spent our evenings sitting on the porch, sipping tea, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we'd laugh about old memories. Other times, we'd sit in comfortable silence, our hands resting together. From the outside looking in, we were the picture of a long, happy marriage. Even I believed that, until the little cracks began to show. It started small. Thomas began coming home later than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. He told me there was extra work at the shop, that deadlines were piling up. I accepted it, because Thomas was the most hardworking man I knew. But then, there were other things. I'd catch a strange expression on his face when he thought I wasn't looking. A heaviness, a distance. He became protective of his phone, something he'd once left lying carelessly on the kitchen counter. Some nights, I'd wake in the dark and find his side of the bed empty. The faint creak of the floorboards telling me he was pacing somewhere in the house. I pushed the worries aside. After all, we'd been married for decades. What reason would I have to doubt him? But deep down, a quiet unease had begun to grow, a whisper I couldn't quite silence. Looking back now, I realized the signs were there all along, subtle but persistent. Back then, though, I told myself he was just tired, that life was simply wearing him down. If only I had listened to that whisper, maybe I wouldn't have been so blindsided by the storm that was about to come. Back then, I believed love was a shield, strong enough to protect the marriage from anything. But life has a way of revealing truths you never expect. And sometimes, those truths arrive like a lightning strike, shattering everything you thought you knew. At first, I told myself everything was fine. Thomas was just busy, I said. Work was demanding, deadlines were stressful. It was nothing more than that. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the tick of the old clock in our hallway, my thoughts would wander. And in that stillness, the doubts I tried so hard to silence began to speak louder. Thomas had always been a creature of habit. For years, I could set my watch by him. 6 o'clock dinner, 7 o'clock on the porch, bed by 10. But now, his patterns were shifting in ways I couldn't ignore. He started coming home later and later, always with an explanation that sounded almost too practiced. Just one of those days at the shop. Maggie, had to stay late to finish an order. Don't wait up for me. And while he smiled when he said these things, his eyes didn't quite meet mine anymore. At first I brushed it off. After all, we'd been married for decades. A little distance now and then was normal, wasn't it? But slowly, my unease began to grow. One evening, he came home smelling faintly of cologne, not the earthy woodsy kind I'd bought him years ago, but something unfamiliar, something sharp and expensive. I remember hugging him, inhaling deeply, and feeling my stomach twist into knots. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, set dinner on the table, and swallowed the lump in my throat. Then, there was the phone. For most of our marriage, Thomas couldn't care less about his phone. Half the time, it was left lying on the counter or buried under a pile of mail. But suddenly, he started keeping it close, too close. If it rang while we were together, he'd step into another room to answer it, speaking in a low tone I couldn't quite make out. When I'd ask who it was, he'd wave a hand dismissively and say, "Just work, Maggie. Nothing for you to worry about." But I did worry. Oh, how I worried. I told myself not to overthink things. I told myself that after all these years, Thomas deserved the benefit of the doubt. But no matter how I tried to calm myself, there was a whisper in the back of my mind, growing louder with every passing day. It said, "Something isn't right." The whisper turned into a scream the day my oldest friend, Helen, called me. Her voice was hesitant, shaky even, as though she didn't want to speak the words. "Maggie," she began softly, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I thought you should know. I saw Thomas yesterday. He was at that little cafe on Elm Street, but he wasn't alone." My heart stopped beating for a moment. I forced a laugh, though my voice trembled. "Oh, maybe he was meeting a client," I said, clinging desperately to hope. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't think so," Helen whispered. "Maggie, the way they were sitting, it didn't look like business." After that call, I couldn't focus on anything. The laundry sat unfolded, the dishes unwashed. I moved through the house like a ghost, my mind spinning. When Thomas came home that evening, he was cheerful, humming a tune as he hung his coat. I studied him closely, my heart pounding, searching his face for some sign, some clue. But he looked the same as always, the same man I'd loved for nearly 40 years, and that made it even harder to know what to believe. I wanted to confront him. Oh, how badly I wanted to blurt out the question burning in my chest. Thomas, who was she? But I couldn't, because if I asked, I might hear an answer I wasn't ready for. So instead, I smiled through dinner, nodded at his stories, and laughed at his jokes while my heart ached beneath the surface. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice more little things. A mysterious charge on our bank statement, labeled simply as miscellaneous. A restaurant receipt tucked into his jacket pocket from a place I'd never been. A distant look in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. Each discovery was like a tiny puzzle piece falling into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Then, it happened again. Another call from Helen. This time her voice was almost apologetic. "Maggie," she said gently, "I don't want to hurt you, but I saw Thomas again today." Same woman. They were walking down Maple Street, and they were holding hands. I couldn't speak. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the kitchen floor. I managed to thank her, my voice barely above a whisper, before hanging up the phone. Then I sank into the nearest chair, staring at the wall as tears welled in my eyes. That night, I sat alone in the dark, surrounded by silence. Thomas was in the living room, watching television, laughing at some comedy show, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I stared at the family photographs lining the mantel, smiling faces, happy memories, and I wondered if any of it had been real. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed, listening to Thomas's breathing beside me, my mind racing. The whisper in my heart was now a roar, impossible to ignore. Something is wrong. Something is terribly, terribly wrong. But even then, I clung to the tiniest shred of hope. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Because the alternative was too painful to face. Looking back now, I realize how deeply fear can blind us. We silence our doubts because we're terrified of the truth. But the truth, The truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how hard we try to bury it, and soon, mine would come crashing down, in a way I could never have imagined. There's a strange kind of peace that comes before a storm, an eerie calm where the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. That was how the days felt leading up to the moment my world came crashing down. I was walking through life in a haze, clinging to a fragile thread of hope. Maybe Helen had been mistaken. Maybe the charges on our bank account had some innocent explanation. Maybe Thomas was just tired, distracted, human. I told myself these things over and over, like a prayer I didn't quite believe. One rainy Thursday morning, I decided to clean out the hall closet. It was such an ordinary task, but sometimes life has a way of hiding extraordinary truths in the most ordinary places. As I sorted through old coats and dusty boxes, my hand brushed against something unusual, a leather folder tucked deep into the back corner, almost hidden. Curiosity stirred. I pulled it out, brushing away a layer of dust. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were papers, receipts, bank statements, and photographs. But these weren't just any photographs. These were pictures of Thomas smiling, holding hands with a woman I had never seen before, and beside them, a young boy with Thomas's unmistakable hazel eyes. The room seemed to spin round me. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the folder. At first, I told myself there must be some mistake. Maybe it was an old friend. Maybe the boy was just a neighbor. But then my eyes fell on a birth certificate tucked neatly among the papers. The father's name was clear as day, Thomas Carter. I sank to the floor, clutching the papers as a sob tore through my chest. It was as though every breath I'd ever taken, every moment of trust, every dream I'd built, all of it shattered in an instant. Thomas hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd built an entirely separate life, a second family, hidden away like a dark secret he never meant for me to find. Memories flooded my mind, cruel and relentless. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the scent of unfamiliar cologne. It all made sense now. The puzzle pieces fit together perfectly, painting a picture I'd been too afraid to see. I felt sick, physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and retched, my body rejecting the truth as violently as my heart did. When I could finally breathe again, I returned to the hall closet, staring at the evidence as tears streamed down my face. The boy in the photographs looked to be around 10 years old, which meant Thomas's betrayal had been going on for at least a decade. 10 years. 10 years of lies. 10 years of family dinners, holiday gatherings, and whispered promises, all while he was living a double life. The depth of it was almost too much to comprehend. When Thomas came home that evening, I couldn't even look at him. I sat in the kitchen, silent, my hands folded tightly in my lap as he walked through the door, humming a cheerful tune. He kissed my cheek, completely unaware that I now knew everything. "Long day?" he asked casually, setting down his lunch pail. "You wouldn't believe the order we had to finish today." I nodded mutely, my throat burning with words I couldn't yet speak. I wanted to scream, to hurl the photographs at him, and demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I excused myself, retreating to the bedroom under the pretense of a headache. Once alone, I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow to muffle my sobs. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Thomas's steady breathing beside me. I kept replaying our entire life together in my mind, trying to pinpoint the moment it had all gone wrong. Was there something I'd missed, some sign I should have seen sooner? But no matter how far back I went, I couldn't make sense of it. The man lying next to me had been both my greatest love and my deepest betrayal. How could those two truths coexist? The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't live in limbo anymore. I needed answers. I needed to hear the truth from Thomas's own lips, no matter how much it hurt. So while he was in the shower, I gathered the folder and set it on the kitchen table, right where he'd see it the moment he walked in. Then I sat down, my hands trembling, and waited. When Thomas finally entered the kitchen, his cheerful humming died mid. His eyes fell on the folder, then darted to my face. In that instant, everything was laid bare. The guilt, the fear, the knowledge that his secret world had just come crashing down. "Maggie," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Where did you find that?" My own voice was raw, hoarse from a night of silent tears. "How long, Thomas?" I asked. "How long have you been lying to me?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he sank into the chair opposite me. his shoulders slumping in defeat. I never wanted you to find out, he said softly. I thought I could keep the two worlds separate. I thought I could protect you. I let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. Protect me, by building a secret family behind my back, by letting me live a lie for 10 years. His face crumpled with shame, but he didn't deny it. He didn't even try. As he spoke, the full scope of his betrayal spilled out. Her name was Clara. They'd met by chance, and what began as a brief affair had turned into something far more complicated. When Clara became pregnant, Thomas had felt obligated to support her and their child, Ethan, but instead of confessing, he'd chosen deception, weaving a tangled web of lies that grew thicker with each passing year. I never stopped loving you, Maggie, he said desperately. You have to believe that, Clara. She was a mistake that got out of hand. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I stared at him, my heart a frozen, shattered thing. You didn't want to hurt anyone, I repeated, my voice trembling. Thomas, you destroyed me. The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, steady, relentless, like a cruel reminder of every second that had been stolen from me. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I need you to leave, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need space to think, to breathe. Thomas reached for me, but I stepped back. For the first time in our marriage, I couldn't bear his touch. After he left, I collapsed to the floor, sobbing until there was nothing left inside me. The man I'd built my life with, the father of my children, had betrayed me in the most profound way imaginable. And the worst part was, I didn't know if I'd ever recover. In that moment, I realized something devastating. The life I'd believed in for decades had been nothing more than a beautifully constructed illusion. And now, that illusion had been ripped away, leaving me alone in the wreckage, unsure of who I was or what came next. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. When Thomas walked out that day, leaving me alone in the house we'd built together, I thought the silence would bring me peace. It didn't. The quiet wasn't soothing, it was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock felt like an echo of my shattered life. I wandered from room to room, clutching a pillow to my chest as if it could keep me from falling apart completely. Everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts, ghosts of the life we'd shared, the rocking chair where I'd nursed our babies, the worn spot on the couch where Thomas used to fall asleep watching late-night television, the kitchen table where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. That had all felt tainted now, poisoned by lies. For 2 days, I stayed in that house, crying until my body ached, my throat raw from silent screams. But grief slowly began to turn into something sharper. Anger. Anger at Thomas for what he'd done, anger at Clara for being part of it, and, worst of all, anger at myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for letting my love blind me. By the 3rd day, I knew I couldn't just sit in that house drowning in sorrow. I needed answers. I needed to hear every detail, every ugly truth, directly from the man who had betrayed me. I called Thomas and told him to meet me at home after work. My voice was steady, almost cold. He didn't argue. He just said, "I'll be there." When he arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where so much of our life had played out. The folder of evidence lay between us like a loaded weapon. Thomas walked in slowly, his face pale and drawn. He looked older somehow, like the weight of his lies had finally settled on his shoulders. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. "Sit down," I said flatly. He obeyed, sinking into the chair opposite me. We sat in tense silence, the distance between us wider than it had ever been. "Start talking," I demanded finally. "No excuses. No half. I want everything, Thomas, all of it." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table. "Maggie, I don't." "Maggie, me," I snapped, slamming my palm against the table. "You've been lying to me for 10 years. 10 years, Thomas. I deserve to know every detail of the life you built behind my back." His eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered. "I swear, I never meant for it to go this far." "You never meant for it to go this far." My voice was sharp, bitter. "Thomas, you didn't just have an affair. You had a child, a whole other family. How does something like that just happen?" He dropped his gaze to the table, unable to meet my eyes. "Clara and I, it was supposed to be nothing, a mistake. I was lonely, Maggie. You were so focused on the kids back then, and I felt invisible." Those words cut deeper than any knife. I felt my breath hitch, my chest tightening. "So you felt invisible." I hissed. And instead of talking to me, instead of working through it like a husband should, you went and found comfort in someone else's bed. His face crumpled with shame. I know how it sounds. And you're right, it was wrong. Every part of it was wrong. But when Clara told me she was pregnant, I couldn't abandon her. I couldn't abandon my son. For a moment, the room was utterly silent except for the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. My son, the words echoed like a curse. Our children, I said, my voice breaking. Do they even know they have a half-brother? Did you ever plan to tell them? Thomas shook his head, tears streaming down his face now. No, I thought I could keep the two worlds separate, provide for both families without you ever finding out. I told myself I was protecting you from the pain. I let out a hollow laugh, cold and bitter. Protecting me. Thomas, you've been lying to me for a decade. You've been sitting at this very table, looking me in the eye, and feeding me lies. That's not protection. That's cruelty. He reached across the table, desperate, but I jerked my hand away as though his touch burned. Please, Maggie, he begged. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Clara, she was never you. You are my wife, my heart. Everything I've done was to try to keep you safe. I stared at him, my vision blurred by tears. Love, I whispered. You don't get to use that word, Thomas. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't create a secret family and hide it for 10 years. My voice rose, trembling with rage. Do you have any idea what you've done to me, to us? You've destroyed everything we built together. Our marriage, our family, our trust. He was sobbing now, his shoulders shaking, but I felt no sympathy. Not yet. Tell me about Clara, I demanded. Tell me how it started. Tell me why she was worth risking everything we had. His words came haltingly, painfully. He told me about the day they met at a hardware store, of all places. How it began as small talk, then coffee, then something more. How he told himself it was harmless, until it wasn't. When she told me she was pregnant, he said, I wanted to confess everything to you, but every time I looked at you, at the kids, I couldn't. I thought if I worked harder, if I kept you happy, maybe I could make it right somehow. I sat there, numb, as he spoke. His words washed over me like cold water, leaving me shivering, hollow. Finally, I whispered, you had so many chances to tell me, Thomas, so many nights when we sat together, just the two of us. You could have told me the truth, but instead, you chose to keep lying, every single day. He bowed his head, unable to respond. At last, I stood, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I can't listen to this anymore, I said, my voice breaking. You've taken everything from me, my trust, my peace, my marriage, and now I have to decide whether I can ever forgive you. But tonight, I just need you to leave. Thomas rose slowly, tears streaming down his face. Maggie, please, go, I whispered. If you love me, if you have even an ounce of respect left for me, you'll go. He hesitated, then nodded. Without another word, he walked out the door, leaving me alone once more. As the sound of his footsteps faded, I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if my marriage could survive, or if I even wanted it to. All I knew was that I'd been given the truth, and sometimes the truth is the heaviest burden of all. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a single thought echoed in my mind. The man I loved is gone, and the man who remains, I don't know if I can ever love him again. The morning after Thomas left, the house felt unbearably empty. It wasn't just the absence of his voice or the sound of his footsteps, it was the absence of what we'd once been. The love, the laughter, the sense of safety, gone, like smoke dissolving into the air. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder of evidence I'd left there. The papers, the photographs, the birth certificate. It all felt unreal, like some terrible dream I couldn't wake from. Part of me wanted to throw it all in the fireplace and watch it burn, but another part of me couldn't, because as much as I hated it, this folder was my reality now, my proof that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that my heartbreak wasn't just some wild suspicion. The hardest part wasn't my pain though, it was knowing I couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. Thomas and I had 3 grown children, Emily, the oldest, steady and practical like her father, then Daniel, our free spirit, always chasing the next adventure, and our youngest, Lily, my baby, sweet and sensitive even now as an adult. How could I tell them that the father they'd always admired had betrayed not just me, but them too? How could I shatter their image of the man they loved? But I knew I had no choice. Secrets have a way of festering, of poisoning everything they touch. And this secret was far too big to keep buried. I called Emily first. My voice trembled as I asked her to come by that evening, without explaining why. Then I did the same with Daniel and Lily. All three of them sounded concerned. And I could hear the questions they didn't voice, but I couldn't bring myself to answer them, not yet. As the day wore on, my anxiety grew. I paced the living room, straightening pillows and folding blankets I'd already folded twice. When the doorbell finally rang, my heart nearly leaped out of my chest. The kids arrived one by one, their familiar faces a bittersweet comfort. We gathered in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken worry. Emily frowned. "Mom, what's going on? You sounded off on the phone." I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. "Please, sit down. What I have to tell you, it's going to hurt." They exchanged uneasy glances before settling onto the couch. Lily reached for my hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom, you're scaring us." I sat across from them, my throat tight. "Your father has been keeping a secret from us, from all of us." Daniel leaned forward. "What kind of secret?" I hesitated, tears welling in my eyes. "He's been involved with another woman for many years." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and poisonous. Emily's face went pale. Daniel's mouth dropped open, and Lily shook her head in disbelief. Lily whispered, "No, no, Dad wouldn't. He wouldn't do that to you, to us." "I wish it weren't true," I said softly, "but there's more. He has a son with her, a boy named Ethan. He's about 10 years old." The room erupted. Daniel jumped to his feet. 10 years? You're telling me Dad has had a whole other family for a decade?" Emily buried her face in her hands, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. Lily clutched my hand tighter, her own tears spilling over. Lily choked out, How could he do this to us? Does he even love us?" Her question shattered me. "Of course he loves you," I said, my voice breaking. "What he did has nothing to do with you. This was his failure, his choice, not yours." We sat there for what felt like hours, the air thick with grief and anger. Daniel paced the room, muttering under his breath. Emily eventually lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. Emily asked quietly, "Where is Dad now?" "He's staying somewhere else, for the time being," I said. "I told him I needed space to think." Daniel spat. "Think? What's there to think about? He lied to you, to all of us. He doesn't deserve to be anywhere near this family." Lily whispered, "What happens now?" I didn't have an answer. For the first time in my life, I had no roadmap, no clear path forward. All I could do was take things one painful day at a time. Word of Thomas's betrayal spread quickly in our small town. Friends and neighbors who once greeted me warmly now avoided my eyes, their whispers trailing behind me like shadows. Some offered pity, others judgment. I hated both. I stopped going to the market, stopped attending church. Even simple errands became unbearable. It felt like everyone knew, everyone was watching. Everyone had an opinion about my marriage and my life. Isolation settled over me like a heavy blanket. The house, once filled with laughter, felt like a prison. I'd sit by the window for hours, staring out at the world I no longer felt part of. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in our bed, the emptiness beside me a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Sleep wouldn't come, no matter how exhausted I was. Instead, I'd replay every memory of my marriage, trying to understand how it had all unraveled. I thought about our early years, the way Thomas used to hold me while we danced in the kitchen, the whispered promises we'd made beneath the stars. Were those moments real? Or had he been lying to me even then? The uncertainty was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. One evening, Emily stopped by unexpectedly. She found me sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm night air. Emily sat beside me, her voice gentle. "Mom, you don't have to go through this alone. We're here for you. Always." I smiled weakly, tears filling my eyes. "I know, sweetheart, but some parts of this, I have to face on my own." Emily hesitated. "Have you thought about what you'll do? About whether you'll forgive him?" The question hung between us like smoke. I stared into the darkness, my heart aching. "Forgiveness feels impossible right now," I admitted, "but holding on to this anger forever, I don't want that either. I just don't know how to move forward yet." After she left, I sat alone, thinking about what forgiveness really meant. It wasn't about excusing Thomas's actions or forgetting the pain he'd caused. It was about freeing myself from the bitterness that threatened to consume me. But I wasn't ready, not yet. The days blurred together, each one heavy with grief. I tried to focus on small tasks, watering the garden, baking bread, reading books I couldn't concentrate on, but no matter what I did, the weight of what had happened never lifted. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to call Thomas, out of sheer habit, and every time, the realization would hit me like a blow. The man I once shared everything with was now a stranger. One night, as I lay awake, I made a quiet vow to myself. I couldn't control what Thomas had done, or how the town saw me, or even how my children were processing their own pain. But I could control one thing: how I chose to heal. I didn't know what healing would look like yet. I didn't know how long it would take, but I promised myself that I wouldn't let his betrayal define the rest of my life. I would survive this storm. Somehow, some way, I would find my way back to myself. I used to believe that strength was something you were either born with or not, that some people were naturally resilient, while others simply broke under the weight of life's hardships. But after Thomas's betrayal, I learned the truth. Strength isn't something you're given, it's something you build, one painful, trembling step at a time. The weeks after the confession felt like walking through a dense fog. Days blurred together, marked only by the sun rising and setting. I went through the motions, eating when I remembered, sleeping in fits and starts, speaking only when necessary. But inside, I was hollow. There were mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed at all, when the thought of facing another day seemed unbearable. But I forced myself to rise, not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let the pain win. Each small act, brushing my hair, making tea, opening the curtains, became a tiny rebellion against the darkness trying to swallow me whole. One morning, while sitting at the kitchen table, I realized something important. For decades, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being Thomas's wife and my children's mother. I'd devoted myself so completely to my family that somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself. Now, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, I didn't even know who Maggie was anymore. What did I like? What did I want for myself? Did I have dreams of my own, separate from theirs? The questions were terrifying, but I knew that if I didn't face them, I'd remain stuck in the shadow of a life that no longer existed. So, I began small. At first, it was just a walk around the block, breathing in the fresh air and feeling the sun on my face. Then I visited the little bookstore in town, a place I'd loved in my youth but hadn't stepped foot in 4 years. I bought a journal, its cover a soft, calming blue, and began writing down my thoughts each evening. Some days, my entries were nothing but anger, messy scrawls of rage and heartbreak. Other days, they were quiet reflections, snippets of gratitude for the smallest things: the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of birdsong at dawn, the comforting weight of my granddaughter's hug. These moments didn't erase the pain, but they reminded me that life still held beauty, even in the midst of grief. My children were my lifeline during those early weeks. Emily checked in almost daily, her steady presence a balm to my wounded heart. Daniel, though still furious with his father, made me laugh with his irreverent humor. And Lily, sweet, tender Lily, often came by just to sit beside me in silence, her hand clasped around mine, that we were all healing together, each in our own way. Sometimes, we cried together. Other times, we reminisced about happier memories, clinging to the parts of our family that were still whole. But there were moments when I sensed their unspoken question: would I ever take their father back? Would I ever forgive him? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. One Sunday afternoon, Emily convinced me to attend a support group for women who had endured betrayal. I resisted at first. The idea of sitting in a circle with strangers, baring my soul, felt impossible. But Emily was persistent, and eventually, I agreed. Walking into that small church basement was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I kept my eyes on the floor, my hands trembling, but when I finally looked up, I saw a room full of women with stories etched into their faces. Pain, yes, but also resilience. One by one, they shared their journeys. Some were still raw with heartbreak, their voices shaking with anger and grief. Others spoke with a calm strength that seemed impossible to me in that moment. When it was my turn, I could barely speak. "My name is Maggie," I began, my throat tight. "A few weeks ago, I found out that my husband of 35 years has been living a double life. He has a son with another woman, and I don't know how to move forward." The group didn't judge me. They didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. They simply listened, truly listened, and in their eyes, I saw understanding. For the first time since that terrible day, I felt less alone. Over time, Those meetings became a lifeline. I learned that healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I'd feel almost normal, even hopeful. Other days, the grief would crash over me like a wave, dragging me back into despair. And that was okay. Healing, I realized, was more about persistence than perfection, about showing up for yourself, even when it feels impossible. As the weeks turned into months, I began reclaiming pieces of myself I'd long neglected. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. At first, my brushstrokes were tentative, shaky, but soon, they grew bolder, more confident. The act of creating something beautiful out of nothing felt like a quiet form of defiance. I also began volunteering at the local animal shelter. The simple joy of caring for creatures who needed love reminded me that my heart, though battered, was still capable of giving. Each small act of rebuilding became a brick in the foundation of my new life. Meanwhile, Thomas remained in the background. He called occasionally, his voice heavy with regret, but I rarely answered. When we did speak, our conversations were stilted, awkward. He wanted to explain himself, to seek forgiveness, but I wasn't ready. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of him around town at the grocery store, walking to his car. Each sighting was a sharp twist of the knife, but instead of crumbling, I held my head high and walked past him. It was my silent declaration: I am more than what you did to me. One evening, while journaling, I found myself writing about forgiveness, not as a gift to Thomas, but as a gift to myself. I realized that carrying my anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to suffer. It was eating me alive. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing his actions. It didn't mean welcoming him back into my life. It simply meant choosing to release the hold his betrayal had over me. That night, I wrote a letter to Thomas. I poured out every ounce of pain, every unanswered question, every shred of love and hate tangled inside me. I didn't plan to send it. It was for me, not him. When I finished, I took the letter outside and burned it, watching the ashes rise into the night sky. As the paper crumbled to nothing, I felt a small, fragile sense of peace. I wasn't fully healed. I knew there were still hard days ahead, but for the first time, I believed healing was possible. Thomas had broken my trust, my marriage, my heart, but he hadn't broken me, and slowly, painfully, I was learning to stand tall again. I didn't know what the future held, whether forgiveness would ever fully bloom, or whether Thomas and I would find some semblance of closure. But I knew this: I was more than his betrayal, and no matter what came next, I would face it with courage. I'd spent months trying to avoid even thinking about her. Clara, the woman whose name had been burned into my mind the day I first saw it on those documents. The woman who had shared my husband's love, who had carried his child, who had been living a life entwined with mine, all without my knowledge. In my darkest moments, I had imagined what she looked like. Sometimes I saw her as a heartless seductress, someone who had deliberately set out to destroy my marriage. Other times, I pictured a lonely woman who, like me, had been fed lies by the man we both thought we knew, but I never expected to actually meet her. The very idea felt impossible, too raw, too dangerous. And yet, deep down, I knew that until I faced her, a part of me would never find peace. One chilly autumn morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The letter I'd burned weeks earlier had given me some relief, but the questions remained, questions only Clara could answer. Did she know about me all along? Did she know Thomas was married? Did she understand what her presence in his life had cost me and our children? As much as I feared the answers, I couldn't live with the not knowing. So, with trembling hands, I looked up her address, which I'd memorized from the papers I'd found months earlier. Her house was only a 15-minute drive away. 15 minutes, yet it felt like crossing into another world, a world where my husband had built an entirely separate life. The drive there was a blur. I barely remember the passing streets, only the pounding of my heart and the steady rhythm of my own ragged breathing. By the time I pulled into the quiet neighborhood where she lived, my palms were slick with sweat. Clara's house was small but well-kept, with cheerful yellow shutters and a tidy garden of marigolds lining the walkway. Somehow, that hurt the most, the normalcy of it. This wasn't some dark lair of deceit. It was just a home. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn back and pretend this visit had never been planned. But I forced myself to breathe, to gather the scraps of courage I'd been building over these past few months. Finally, I stepped out of the car and walked up the path, each step heavier than the last. When I knocked, My heart felt like it might break through my ribs. There was a pause, and then the door opened. The woman standing before me was nothing like I'd imagined. She was around my age, maybe a few years younger, with kind brown eyes and a face etched with the same weariness I saw in the mirror every morning. She looked ordinary, human. For a moment, we just stared at each other, words trapped in our throats. Clara frowned slightly. "Can I help you?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely more than a whisper. "My name is Maggie. I'm Thomas's wife." Her eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her mouth. "Clara." Oh my God, the truth hung between us like a blade. She stepped aside slowly, her face pale. "Please, come in." Her living room was warm and cozy, filled with signs of a family life, a stack of children's books on the coffee table, a school backpack by the door. The sight made my stomach twist. We sat across from each other, silence stretching between us. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't know, Maggie, I swear to you, I didn't know he was married. When I met Thomas, he told me he was divorced. He said his marriage had ended years ago." Her words hit me like a wave. Part of me wanted to believe her. Another part screamed that she was lying. "How could you not know?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "We've lived in this town for decades. He has 3 grown children. Did you never wonder why he kept you hidden?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. I thought he was just private. He said his ex-wife was difficult, that she wouldn't let him see his kids often. And Maggie, he was so convincing. He brought me flowers, made me feel like I was his whole world." Her voice broke. "I loved him. I thought we were building a life together." Hearing her say those words ignited something dark inside me. Rage, hot and bitter, surged through my veins. "While you were building a life with him," I spat. "I was at home raising our children, celebrating anniversaries, believing we were happy. Do you have any idea what it feels like to wake up one day and realize your entire marriage was a lie?" Clara flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, "because that's how I feel right now." Her response stunned me into silence. In that moment, I saw her not as my enemy, but as another victim of Thomas's deceit. We were both women who had given our hearts to the same man and been betrayed by him in different ways. I sank back into my chair, my anger dissolving into exhaustion. Why didn't he just choose one of us?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Why live this double life?" Clara shook her head, her expression filled with sorrow. "I've asked myself the same thing 1,000 times. Maybe he was selfish. Maybe he was afraid of losing either of us, so he tried to keep us both. But in the end, he's lost everything." Her words rang painfully true. Thomas had destroyed 2 families with his lies, and for what? Some fleeting fantasy of having it all. A sound from down the hall broke our heavy silence. A moment later, a boy appeared, maybe 10 years old, with Thomas's unmistakable eyes. My breath caught in my throat. Clara quickly stood, her voice gentle. "Ethan, sweetheart, this is a friend of Mummy's. Can you go back to your room for a bit?" The boy nodded and disappeared down the hall, leaving me shaken. Seeing him made everything achingly real. Thomas's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it had a living, breathing face. Clara turned back to me, her own tears shining. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Maggie, but please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you. If I'd known the truth, I would have ended things immediately." I studied her face, searching for any hint of deception, but all I saw was heartbreak that mirrored my own. Finally, I nodded slowly. "I believe you." The words felt strange on my tongue, but they were true. Clara wasn't my enemy. Thomas was the one who had woven this web of lies around us both. When I left her house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. My heart felt heavy, but also lighter, somehow. Meeting Clara hadn't erased the pain, but it had given me clarity. For so long, I'd been consumed by rage at the other woman. But now I understood, she wasn't the villain of my story. She was another chapter in Thomas's long history of deceit. As I drove home, I realized that confronting her hadn't been about blame at all. It had been about reclaiming my own power, about finally closing a door on the life Thomas had built without me. That night, as I sat in bed, I whispered to myself, "He broke both of us, but he will not define me." And for the first time, I truly believed it. When I returned home from Clara's house, the world felt quieter somehow. Not peaceful, no. Peace was still far away, but still, like the air after a storm, heavy with the weight of what had been unleashed. Meeting her hadn't given me closure, but it had given me truth, and truth, painful as it was, is always better than the corrosive uncertainty of lies. For weeks, I'd avoided making a decision about my marriage. Thomas had been calling, sending letters, even leaving flowers on the porch like a boy begging forgiveness after a schoolyard quarrel. But this wasn't a quarrel. This was the undoing of 35 years of life together. Now, standing in my living room with the last rays of sunset filtering through the curtains, I knew it was time to face the question I'd been avoiding. Was there any future left for us? The next morning, I asked Thomas to meet me at the park. I couldn't bear the thought of him sitting across from me in our home, a place now haunted by memories of our life together. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting on a bench beneath the big oak tree where we'd once taken our children for picnics. The sight of him nearly broke me. He looked older, thinner, like the weight of his choices had carved deep lines into his face. But I forced myself to remember that pain did not erase guilt. I walked toward him slowly, each step measured. He stood as I approached, his eyes searching mine with a desperate kind of hope. "Thomas, Maggie, thank you for coming. Sit," I said quietly. My voice sounded calm, but inside, my heart was pounding. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of children playing in the distance felt jarring against the heaviness between us. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "Thomas, I've been going crazy not being able to talk to you. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make right. But please, if you'll just let me explain." "Explain," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "Thomas, I don't need an explanation. I have the facts. You lived a double life for over a decade. You lied to me, to our children, to Clara, to everyone." His face crumpled. "Thomas, I know, and I hate myself for it. I was selfish, afraid. I wanted to keep our family, but I couldn't give up Clara either. I told myself I could manage both, that no one had to get hurt. No one had to get hurt." My voice rose, trembling with fury. "Thomas, do you hear yourself? Everyone got hurt. You didn't just destroy our marriage. You broke our children's trust. You broke Clara's heart, and you shattered me." My words hung in the air like shards of glass. Thomas bowed his head, silent tears slipping down his face. For a moment, I almost pitied him. "Almost, Thomas. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But Maggie, I love you. I've always loved you. If you'll give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you." I stared at him, searching for sincerity. I found it, but it didn't bring comfort. Love, I realized, wasn't the issue. Trust was, and trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. "Thomas," I said softly, "I met Clara." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "Thomas, you spoke to her?" "Yes," I replied. "She didn't know about me. She thought you were divorced. Do you understand what that means? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed her too." Thomas buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Thomas, God, what have I done?" "Exactly," I said coldly. "What have you done? You've left a trail of devastation behind you, and now you want me to clean it up by forgiving you, by pretending we can go back to how things were." I stood, unable to sit still any longer. "But Thomas, we can't go back. That life is gone." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Thomas, please, Maggie, we could start fresh. Counseling, whatever it takes. I can't bear the thought of losing you." Tears filled my eyes, blurring the world around me. "You already lost me, Thomas. The day you chose to live a lie, you lost the version of me who trusted you completely." I turned away, trying to steady my breathing. "The only question now is whether I can ever build something new with the man you've become." The truth was, I didn't know. Even after months of reflection, of healing, of reclaiming pieces of myself, I still didn't have a clear answer. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever choice I made, it had to be for me, not for him, not for our children, not for appearances, for me. "Thomas," I said finally, "I don't have an answer today, but I need you to understand this. If there is any chance for us, it will require complete honesty from this moment forward. No more lies, no more secrets." He nodded fervently, clinging to my words like a lifeline. "Thomas, I'll do whatever it takes." As we parted ways, I felt strangely calm, not because a decision had been made, but because I'd reclaimed my power. For so long, Thomas's choices had dictated my life. Now, the future was mine to shape. That evening, I sat with my children and told them about my conversation with their father. Emily was quiet, her expression unreadable. Daniel was furious, while Lily simply wept. "Daniel, so what happens now, Mom? Are you really thinking about taking him back after everything he's done?" I took a deep breath. I don't know yet. What I do know is that forgiveness isn't about him. It's about me, about freeing myself from this bitterness so I can move forward, whatever that looks like. Emily nodded slowly. We'll support you, no matter what you decide. Their love gave me strength. No matter what happened with Thomas, I knew I would never walk this road alone. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. For months, I'd seen only a broken woman staring back at me. But now, I saw someone else, a survivor, a woman who had been burned to ashes and was slowly, painfully, rising again. Thomas might one day earn a place in my life again, or he might not. Either way, I would be okay. Because for the first time in decades, my future wasn't tied to his choices. It was tied to mine. Before bed, I whispered a quiet prayer to the universe, not for reconciliation, not for revenge, but for clarity, for the strength to choose the path that would lead me to peace. That as I turned off the light, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and though the road ahead would be long and winding, I was finally ready to take the first step. 6 months have passed since the day I met Clara and truly saw the wreckage of Thomas's choices laid bare before me. 6 months since that conversation in the park where I told him I needed time to grieve, to heal, to decide. Those first weeks were the hardest. The silence of the house felt oppressive, like a constant reminder of what had been lost. Even simple things, making coffee in the morning, folding laundry, tending to the garden, felt strange without Thomas humming absent-mindedly or calling out to me from another room. For so many years, my life had been intertwined with his. Now, I was learning how to live alone and how to live for myself. In the beginning, anger was my closest companion. It followed me everywhere, whispering sharp, bitter thoughts into my ear. Whenever I pictured Thomas's face, I saw only the lies, the betrayal, the image of him walking into Clara's home and holding a child I hadn't even known existed. At night, I would lie awake replaying every memory, every conversation, searching for the signs I had missed. And every time, I found myself asking the same painful question. How could the man I loved have done this to me? But over time, the anger began to soften, not because what he did was any less wrong, but because I realized anger was only hurting me. It was a poison I was drinking every day, hoping it would somehow punish him. Instead, it was eating away at my own spirit. One morning, while sitting alone on the porch, I whispered to myself, I deserve better than this. I deserve peace. And that became my new prayer, my new mantra, peace. Thomas and I continued to meet occasionally, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to sit in silence. He started therapy on his own and asked me to join him for a few sessions of couples counseling. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to sit in a room and rehash the past with a stranger watching. But eventually, I went, not for him, but for me. I needed to speak my truth in a safe space, to have someone witness my pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. Those sessions were excruciating. Hearing Thomas admit to the depth of his lies, to the countless choices he made to keep his two lives separate, felt like being stabbed over and over again. But there was also a strange relief in finally having everything out in the open. No more secrets, no more shadows. One day, after a particularly difficult session, Thomas looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, Thomas, I don't expect you to ever love me again, Maggie, but I hope, one day, you can look at me without hate. His words stayed with me for days, because the truth was, I didn't hate him, not anymore. I pitied him, and, in some small, complicated way, I still loved him. But love alone wasn't enough to rebuild what he had broken. The children have been my anchor through all of this. Emily checks on me constantly, always bringing me flowers or little notes of encouragement. Daniel, though still furious with his father, has been protective and fiercely loyal. And Lily, sweet Lily, has a gentleness that reminds me of my own mother. They've all processed this betrayal in their own ways, and it's been painful to watch. But in a strange way, this tragedy has brought us closer. We are a family bound not just by love, but by resilience. A few weeks ago, we all gathered for Sunday dinner, something we hadn't done since the truth came out. As we sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, I felt a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. It hit me then. No matter what happens with Thomas, I will always have this, my children, my home, my strength. As for Clara, I've seen her only once since that first meeting. It wasn't planned. I ran into her at the grocery store, and for a moment, we both froze. Then, to my own surprise, I smiled. A real, genuine smile, because Clara wasn't my enemy. She was another victim of Thomas's lies. We exchanged a few polite words, and when we parted, I felt a strange sense of solidarity with her. We had both survived the same storm. Last week, Thomas came to the house. He looked nervous, like a man walking to his own execution. We sat in the living room, the same room where we had celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, and built a life together. And then, I told him my decision. Thomas, I said, my voice calm and steady. I've thought about this every day for 6 months, and I've realized something important. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let your choices define the rest of my life. Tears welled up in his eyes, but I continued. I don't hate you. I don't even wish you harm, but I can't be your wife anymore. The trust we had is gone, and without trust, there is no marriage. It's time for both of us to move forward separately. Thomas wept openly then, his shoulders shaking as years of guilt poured out of him. I sat quietly, my heart heavy but certain. For the first time in months, I felt free. In the days since that conversation, a new lightness has entered my life. I've started tending to my garden again, planting flowers and herbs that fill the air with fresh scents. I've joined a book club at the library, where I've met new friends who make me laugh until my sides ache. And every morning, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise, and I feel whole. I've even begun to dream again. Not dreams of a perfect marriage or a flawless life, but dreams of simple joys, travel, painting, learning to dance, things that are mine alone, untouched by betrayal or loss. Sometimes, late at night, I still think of Thomas. I wonder if he ever truly understood the depth of the hurt he caused. I wonder if he's found peace, or if he's still wandering in the ruins of his own making. And though part of me will always care for him, I no longer feel bound to his journey. His path is his own. Mine stretches out before me, clear and bright. On the morning of my 58th birthday, Emily, Daniel, and Lily surprised me with breakfast in bed. As I looked around at their smiling faces, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Yes, my marriage had ended. Yes, my heart had been broken, but here I was, surrounded by love, by possibility, by hope. Later that evening, I lit a single candle and made a wish. Not for Thomas to return, not for the past to change, but for the courage to keep choosing myself every single day. As the flame flickered and then went out, I whispered softly to the empty room, "Here's to a new beginning." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Looking back, I see now that the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I am the author of my own life. Betrayal may have broken me, but it also set me free. If anyone listening to my story is standing where I once stood, lost, hurt, afraid, please hear this. You are stronger than you know. You are worthy of love, of peace, of joy, and no matter how dark the night feels, the dawn will come. It always does.